In the dead of winter, 47 masterless samurai marched through the snow of Edo. Their mission was simple, yet deadly: avenge their fallen lord or die trying. What followed became the most famous tale of loyalty and honor in Japanese history. But behind the legend of the 47, Ronin lies a story far more complex, one of politics, betrayal, and sacrifice. This is not Hollywood's version. This is the real story of the 47 Ronin. To truly understand the drama of the 47 Ronin, we must first step into their world. A Japan of rigid order, iron discipline, and a moral code unlike anything familiar to the modern West. It was the early 1700s, the height of the Edo period. The United States, as we know it, did not yet exist. Europe was reshaping itself through revolutions and Enlightenment ideas. But Japan was sealed off from the rest of the world, an island nation locked in a unique rhythm of tradition, hierarchy, and ritual. At the center of this world was the shogun, the military ruler who held real power, while the emperor remained a sacred yet symbolic figure. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled since 1603, imposed peace on the land after centuries of civil war. This peace, however, came with strict controls. Every daimyo, a powerful feudal lord, was kept on a tight leash, required to divide his time between his home province and Edo, the shogun's capital. Samurai, once fearsome warriors who had carved Japan's history in blood, were now turned into administrators, guards, and officials. But despite the lack of wars, the samurai code, Bushido, the way of the warrior, remained unbroken. This code was not just a set of guidelines. It was a way of life. Loyalty to one's lord came above family, above personal ambition, above survival itself. Honor was sacred, and death was preferable to shame. When a samurai failed, whether in duty or in moral conduct, the accepted path to cleanse the stain was seppuku, ritual suicide by one's own blade. To a US audience, this may feel alien, even brutal. In Western tradition, we often elevate individual freedom, self-determination, and the pursuit of happiness. But for a samurai, life was not about personal liberty. It was about duty, to master, to clan, to tradition. A samurai's identity was not his own. It belonged to his lord. Without a lord, a samurai became a ronin, a wave man, drifting aimlessly without anchor or purpose, often despised by society. This was the Japan into which Lord Asano Naganori and his men were born. Their fate was shaped by rules as unforgiving as steel. To understand their eventual rebellion, we must grasp the suffocating social order of Edo Japan. The Tokugawa system divided people into rigid classes. At the top were the samurai, though ironically many lived in poverty as their stipends dwindled. Below them came the peasants, who worked the land, the artisans who produced goods, and the merchants, considered the lowest because they only dealt in trade and profit. Yet in reality, many merchants grew wealthier than impoverished samurai. This imbalance bred resentment, tension, and quiet humiliation for warriors who carried 2 swords but could barely feed their families. Every part of life was choreographed. Clothes, language, gestures, even the way one bowed carried meaning. Insults were not shrugged off as they often are in modern America. A word, a glance, or a breach of etiquette could be a matter of life and death. The samurai embodied this tension most of all. They were protectors without wars, warriors without battles. Their lives became performances of honor, where ceremonies replaced combat, but the stakes remained lethal. Imagine being trained your whole life as a soldier, only to find that your war would be fought with protocol, with words, and with reputation. To a samurai, honor was not negotiable. It was a currency of survival. The United States values honor too. Soldiers salute the flag, veterans carry medals of service, and citizens celebrate courage in times of crisis. But in Edo Japan, honor was not celebrated after the fact. It was demanded every single day. If a samurai was insulted, he had two choices: accept disgrace or defend his honor, even if it meant his death. To refuse was cowardice. To submit was shame. That unforgiving reality meant the difference between life and death could be something as small as the arrangement of words in a letter or the tone of a greeting at court. It was this relentless pursuit of honor, bound by the traditions of Bushido, that would push the 47 Ronin onto their path. They were men raised in a system that gave them no room to fail, no margin for compromise, and no future outside their loyalty to their master. When their lord was disgraced, their lives unraveled with him. The story of the 47 Ronin did not emerge from a chaotic battlefield. It emerged from ceremony, politics, and the collision of fragile egos within a suffocating system. The stage was Edo Castle, where lords gathered under the watchful eye of the shogun. Here, behavior was everything. The wrong gesture could provoke punishment. The wrong reaction could lead to exile or death. The legend of the 47 Ronin begins not with swords drawn in the dead of night, but with whispers in the shogun's court. It was a world where etiquette could wound deeper than steel, and reputation meant everything. In this world, a single insult could destroy a man's life, and one moment of anger could alter history. The man at the center of this storm was Lord Asano Naganori, daimyo of the small but respectable Ako domain in western Japan. Born in 1667, Asano was only in his mid-30s when fate called him to Edo. By all accounts, he was earnest, young, and devoted to his duty. He was no towering warlord, but rather a loyal servant of the Tokugawa system. Yet, like many lords, he was bound by the strict protocols of court life, rituals that were as complex as they were unforgiving. In 1701, Asano was summoned to Edo Castle for one of the most sacred duties of a daimyo, to help host the shogun's envoys in a grand ceremony. This was no small matter. The eyes of the court, and the shogun himself, would judge a lord's conduct. Everything from the arrangement of flowers to the bow of a head had to be perfect. To guide him through this labyrinth of etiquette, Asano was assigned a senior court official, Kira Yoshinaka. Kira was a man with power, but a reputation for arrogance. He held the post of Koke, a master of ceremonies responsible for instructing lords on proper court behavior. This made him indispensable, and in his eyes, entitled to certain gifts from those under his instruction. Many lords reportedly offered bribes or lavish presents to secure his favor. Asano, however, was not one to indulge in corruption. Whether out of youthful pride, moral principle, or simply miscalculation, he failed to offer Kira the tribute he expected. What followed was a clash not of swords, but of egos. Kira, insulted by Asano's refusal to play his game, began to humiliate him. He mocked Asano's ignorance of court protocol, berated him in front of others, and belittled his status as a minor lord from a small province. For a samurai like Asano, bound to defend his honor at all costs, such treatment was unbearable. On the 21st day of the third month of 1701, inside Edo Castle itself, a place where violence was strictly forbidden, the tension finally snapped. Kira once again insulted Asano, reportedly calling him a country bumpkin unworthy of his rank. The words cut deep, and in a sudden flash of rage, Asano drew his short sword. The attack was clumsy. Asano slashed at Kira, but only managed to inflict a shallow wound on his forehead and shoulder. Guards quickly intervened before further blood was shed. But the act itself, raising a blade within Edo Castle, in the very halls of the shogun, was unthinkable. It was not just an outburst, it was a crime of the highest order. The punishment was swift and severe. That very day, Asano was ordered to commit seppuku. No appeals were heard, no second chances given. His domain of Ako was confiscated, his family stripped of titles, and his retainers, more than 300 samurai, were cast adrift as Ronin. This punishment might seem shocking, even cruel. After all, Kira had provoked him. Should not both men have faced justice? But in the rigid order of Tokugawa Japan, the rules were absolute. To draw steel inside Edo Castle was a direct insult to the authority of the shogun. The fact that Kira survived while Asano died only deepened the bitterness. To many, it seemed Kira's connections at court had shielded him from equal punishment. Asano's death left his retainers in despair. Overnight, proud samurai became wandering Ronin, their stipends cut, their honor stained. For a samurai, the disgrace of a master's fall was a personal catastrophe. Some considered scattering, seeking new lords, or abandoning the warrior's life. Others urged revenge. But revenge in Edo Japan was not simple. To strike against Kira without sanction would be to challenge the authority of the shogunate itself, a crime punishable by death. The Ronin knew this, and yet within their hearts, the code of Bushido demanded loyalty beyond the grave. Their master had been forced into death. Could they truly live on without avenging him? The man who stepped forward to lead them was Oishi Kuranosuke, Asano's chief retainer. A man of discipline and cunning, Oishi understood both the risks and the expectations. If they sought revenge, it would not be a matter of weeks or months. It would require patience, secrecy, and a willingness to sacrifice everything. Meanwhile, Kira Yoshinaka may have survived Asano's blade, but he did not escape unscathed. The wound on his head healed quickly, but his reputation did not. Whispers spread that he had provoked Asano deliberately, perhaps to drive him into a fatal mistake. Some sympathized with Asano, seeing him as a victim of Kira's arrogance. Kira, despite his survival, now lived under a cloud of resentment. He fortified his mansion in Edo, hired guards, and watched for any sign of vengeance. He knew the Ronin might not forgive or forget. For years afterward, he lived in fear, looking over his shoulder, sleeping uneasily, even as the shogun's protection shielded him. In Western storytelling, the moment Asano struck at Kira would be the climax. In Japan, it was only the beginning. The tragedy was not simply that Asano died, but that his death created a duty his men could not ignore. For the 47 Ronin, the question was not if they would avenge him, but when and how. The spark had been struck inside Edo Castle, but the fire would take years to burn. The Ronin knew they would have one chance, and one chance only, to succeed. And so they disappeared into the shadows, scattering across the land. Some disguised themselves as merchants, laborers, or drunkards. Others pretended to abandon the cause altogether. All of it was part of a careful, patient deception that would, in time, catch Kira completely off guard. The attack on Kira had failed. Lord Asano was dead. The Akko domain was dissolved. More than 300 samurai had become Ronin overnight. Some drifted away, seeking employment with new lords. Others turned to farming, trade, or obscurity. But for 47 of them, led by Oishi Kuranosuke, the fall of their master was not an ending. It was the beginning of a mission that would consume the rest of their lives. They could have chosen resignation. They could have accepted disgrace, bowed their heads, and lived out their days in quiet dishonor. But in the eyes of samurai, to abandon their master was to abandon themselves. For them, vengeance was not merely an option, it was the only path left. Yet, vengeance in Edo Japan was no simple matter. Kira Yoshinaka was well protected. His mansion was fortified, his movements guarded, his fears ever present. If the Ronin attacked rashly, they would be slaughtered without achieving their goal. Worse still, the shogunate would not tolerate unauthorized vendettas. If their intentions were discovered too soon, they would all be executed before lifting a sword. Oishi Kuranosuke understood that Kira's spies were everywhere. The first step then was to convince the world, and Kira himself, that the Ronin had abandoned their cause. To do this, Oishi staged his own downfall. Once the trusted chief retainer of Akko, he now threw himself into a life of disgrace. He divorced his wife to protect her from suspicion, sent his children away, and took up residence in Kyoto. There, he began a calculated performance. drinking heavily in taverns, visiting brothels, and stumbling through the streets in a haze of apparent ruin. For a samurai, such behavior was shameful. Rumors spread quickly. Oishi, once noble, had become a broken man. Even Kira's spies reported back that the leader of Asano's men had lost himself to vice. The plan was working, but this deception came at a cost. On one occasion, a passerby, disgusted at Oishi's drunken state, spat on him and kicked him in the street. The man shouted that he was no samurai, no man of honor. Oishi endured the humiliation in silence, never breaking character. Inside, however, his resolve remained unshaken. Every insult, every rumor of his downfall only bought him more time to prepare. While Oishi played the part of a ruined man, his comrades scattered. Some disguised themselves as merchants or tradesmen in Edo, keeping careful watch on Kira's mansion. They mapped its defenses, studied the comings and goings of guards, and even learned the layout of the household. Others traveled far, posing as farmers or wanderers to deflect suspicion. Their cover stories were convincing. The Ronin appeared disbanded, their spirit broken. To outsiders, they were no threat at all. But beneath the surface, letters passed in secret, oaths were renewed, and plans were whispered in shadows. The patience required was extraordinary. These men lived in poverty, in obscurity, in humiliation for nearly 2 years. They risked exposure at every turn, but their loyalty to Asano never faltered. They had sworn to avenge him, even if it meant their deaths. Meanwhile, Kira Yoshinaka grew complacent. At first, he had been deeply afraid. After all, samurai vengeance was legendary. But as months passed and no attack came, his fear began to ease. Reports of Oishi's disgrace further reassured him. Perhaps the Ronin had indeed abandoned their cause. Perhaps his enemies had dissolved into nothing. And so, Kira relaxed his guard. His mansion remained fortified, but the vigilance of his household waned. His soldiers grew less alert. His preparations dulled. The very fear that had protected him began to fade, precisely as the Ronin had hoped. By late 1702, the time had come. The Ronin had waited long enough, and Kira's defenses were at their weakest. Oishi gathered his comrades once more. 47 men, bound by loyalty, met in secret to renew their oath. They knew the cost. To attack Kira without shogunate approval was to defy the law. They would almost certainly be executed if they succeeded. Yet not one man hesitated. They pledged their lives to their master's honor, swearing to restore Asano's name, even at the expense of their own. Their plan was meticulous. They would strike at night in the dead of winter, when snow would muffle their movements and few would expect an attack. They armed themselves not only with swords, but with hammers, ladders, and tools to breach Kira's walls. Their strategy was not that of reckless avengers, but of disciplined warriors. Oishi himself divided them into groups, assigning each man a role. Some would storm the gates, others would scale the walls, still others would ensure no messenger escaped to warn the authorities. Every detail was accounted for. This was not a brawl, this was a military operation, the final act of loyalty. As they prepared, each Ronin faced his own reckoning. Some wrote farewell letters to family, others made arrangements for their possessions, knowing they would not live to use them. For these men, the attack was not just an act of vengeance, but an act of self-sacrifice. They were already walking toward death. The winter night was silent, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath disciplined feet. It was the 14th day of the 12th month, in the year 1702. For nearly 2 years, the Ronin had lived in the shadows, drinking, disguising, deceiving. But now they emerged into the frozen streets of Edo with one purpose: vengeance. 47 men, armed with swords, bows, and determination, marched toward the mansion of Kira Yoshinaka. Snowflakes drifted through the air, muffling sound, cloaking their movements, and turning the city into a ghostly stage for the drama about to unfold. Oishi Kuranosuke led them, calm and composed, as if every step was rehearsed. The Ronin were not reckless. They were organized into squads, each with a clear role. Some carried ladders to scale the walls. Others bore hammers to break gates. A group was assigned to guard the perimeter, ensuring no messenger escaped to summon the authorities. Before they advanced, Oishi addressed his men. He reminded them why they had come, to restore their master's honor. He reminded them too of the cost. If they succeeded, they would die. If they failed, they would die. The only difference was whether their master's name would live cleansed or remain forever tarnished. The Ronin bowed deeply, accepting their fate. Then, in the stillness of night, they moved into position. Just before dawn, the assault began. One group smashed through the front gate with hammers, splintering wood in an explosion of sound that shattered the silence. Another group scaled the back walls with ladders, pouring over the defenses like a tide of steel. Kira's guards, caught by surprise, scrambled to respond. Some rushed forward with spears and blades, but the Ronin were prepared. Battle erupted in the snow-covered courtyards, the clash of steel ringing out as neighbors awoke to the sound of war. The Ronin fought with precision, every strike fueled by years of pent-up loyalty and rage. But this was not a massacre. Oishi had given strict orders: do not harm women, children, or servants. Their mission was vengeance, not slaughter. The Ronin fought only those who resisted, cutting down guards but sparing innocents. In this, they remained true to Bushido, even in the chaos of battle. The fight surged deeper into the mansion. Rooms were breached, doors splintered, corridors filled with smoke and snow. But Kira himself was nowhere to be found. Panic spread among his retainers, some fleeing, others cut down in defense. Oishi ordered his men to search every chamber. They overturned screens, ripped open closets, and shouted Kira's name into the darkened halls. The man they had waited 2 years to face was hiding. Finally, in a hidden courtyard shed, they found him. Kira Yoshinaka, the once proud court official, cowered in fear, trembling in the shadows. At first, the Ronin could hardly believe it was him. After all, they had never seen him outside of court dress. Unsure, they demanded his identity. Kira refused to speak. To confirm it was truly him, they examined his scar, the wound left by Asano's failed strike 2 years before. It was unmistakable. Their quarry had been found. Oishi stood before Kira. This was the moment for which they had sacrificed everything. Yet even now, he offered Kira a choice. He presented him with a short blade, inviting him to take his own life in the honorable ritual of seppuku. If Kira had the courage to die as a samurai, he could meet death with dignity. But Kira, paralyzed by fear, refused. He cowered, unable to summon the resolve demanded by Bushido. Seeing this, Oishi did what he must. He raised his blade and delivered the stroke that ended Kira's life. Silence fell. The vendetta was complete. The Ronin gathered Kira's severed head, carefully wrapping it. Their mission was not finished. They marched through Edo, not as fugitives, but as men of honor. At dawn, they reached the temple of Sengakuji, where their master Asano was buried. There, in solemn ceremony, they washed Kira's head, placed it upon Asano's grave, and bowed deeply. Their duty was fulfilled. The people of Edo were astonished. News of the raid spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered to glimpse the Ronin as they passed. Some hailed them as heroes, paragons of loyalty in an age of corruption. Others condemned them as criminals who had defied the law. But all agreed they had done what no one else dared. The shogunate now faced a dilemma. The Ronin had committed a crime. They had killed a man without sanction, violating the peace of the shogun's rule. By law, they deserved death, and yet their act had captured the imagination of the nation. To punish them harshly risked turning them into martyrs. To pardon them would undermine the shogun's authority. For weeks, the government debated their fate. The Ronin waited calmly, knowing what was to come. They had not expected mercy. Their goal had never been survival. Their goal had been honor. The raid on Kira Yoshinaka's mansion was swift and absolute. By dawn on that bitter January morning of 1703, the Ronin had accomplished what they had sworn to do. Their enemy lay dead. his severed head delivered to the tomb of their master, Asano Naganori. For the Ronin, it was not an act of personal gain, nor even one of rage. It was loyalty, distilled to its purest and most merciless form. Yet, even in their moment of triumph, they knew what awaited them. In the rigid society of Tokugawa Japan, revenge was not always considered justice, no matter how righteous it felt. The Ronin had disobeyed the law by taking matters into their own hands. They had stormed the home of a shogunal official, killed dozens of guards, and executed Kira without sanction. Their honor was restored, but their fate now rested in the hands of the very government that had once ordered their master to die. The people of Edo were captivated. Whispers of the raid spread quickly across the city. To many commoners, the Ronin were heroes, symbols of an older, nobler Japan where loyalty and courage mattered more than bureaucratic rules. Crowds gathered outside the temple where the Ronin were held, eager to glimpse these warriors who had dared to sacrifice everything for their master's name. But for the shogunate, the situation was far more complicated. To punish the Ronin harshly risked angering the public, who admired their act of loyalty. Yet, to pardon them entirely would undermine the rule of law, suggesting that private vengeance could outweigh the authority of the shogun. The Ronin, in their silent dignity, had placed the Tokugawa government in an impossible position. The case was brought before Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi himself. Known for his strict and often eccentric rulings, Tsunayoshi was a man deeply concerned with maintaining order. For weeks, his advisors debated the fate of the 47 men. Some argued that they should be executed as common criminals. Others urged leniency, pointing to the samurai code and the righteousness of their cause. In the end, the shogunate struck a compromise, a decision that would preserve both law and honor. The Ronin would not be executed like criminals. Instead, they would be granted the privilege of dying as samurai. Each man was ordered to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide by disembowelment that preserved dignity even in death. It was, in its way, an acknowledgement that the Ronin had acted with integrity, even if their actions broke the law. On February 4th, 1703, just weeks after the raid, the Ronin prepared themselves for death. Divided into 4 groups and housed across different estates, they dressed in white robes, the color of purity and ritual. Each man carried out the grim act with composure, demonstrating the same loyalty in death that had guided them in life. Their leader, Oishi Kuranosuke, was among the last. He had orchestrated the deception, endured humiliation, and led the men into Kira's mansion. Now, as he knelt and performed seppuku, his legacy was sealed. Witnesses reported that the Ronin died calmly, with no hesitation, as if their fates had been decided long before. The bodies of all 46 who had died that day, one had left earlier and was later pardoned, were buried alongside their master at Sengaku-ji Temple in Edo. Even in death, they would serve him, united for eternity. To this day, visitors still lay incense and flowers at their graves, honoring the loyalty that transcended life itself. If this story moved you as much as it has moved countless generations, don't let it end here. Hit the like button to support more documentaries like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the Ronin's choice? And subscribe for more untold stories of history's greatest moments of courage, sacrifice, and honor.